Hey kids, I'd like to share with you a book today called Hurricane, and I'd like to thank Houghton Mifflin for allowing us to share this story with our children, and we'll be deleting it later in accordance with their copyright policies. So, Hurricane. I can't find Hannibal anywhere, Mom, David said. I thought he'd be home when we got back from the store. I'm sure Hannibal is all right, Mom answered. Cats know more about storms than people do. But if it will make you feel better, why don't you and George go look for him while I put the groceries away? Don't go too far from the house. Your father will help you look as soon as he's finished securing everything in the yard. There he is, David exclaimed. He and George peered through the gaps between the strips of tape they had put on the storm door. A thoroughly wet Hannibal peered indignantly back at them. Let's get him inside before the wind blows him away, George said. Could the wind really be strong enough to blow Hannibal away? David asked. Well, the radio said we could expect sustained winds of 50 miles per hour, gusting to 90 any time now, and the hurricane is still 50 miles off the coast. Look at the leaves out there. It looks like a green blizzard, George answered. David listened to the walls of the house creaking against the wind. If it's like this now, what's it going to be like when the hurricane hits? And suddenly, the lights went out. Nobody panic, their dad called from the kitchen. The electric lines must be down. Hang in there, boys. We're on our way with flashlights and candles. They had supper by the fireplace that evening. It felt safe with everybody together, even though there were creaks and groans and sometimes great roaring sounds coming from outside. The hurricane was in full force. David and George took a hurricane lamp to bed with them. The storm had begun to ease. Maybe the eye is passing over us, George said. I'd like to be in one of those weather planes, the ones that fly into the eye of the hurricane where it's all calm and peaceful. Yeah, David said, though he wasn't so certain he'd like to be flying into a hurricane. I wonder where the birds are now, and the squirrels. I bet the squirrels are holed up in their trees, but I've read about birds being blown thousands and thousands of miles, maybe even clear across the Atlantic, George said. Do you think anything awful has happened outside? David asked. Who knows? We'll see tomorrow, replied George. The next morning, only one elm tree was standing near the corner of the yard. The day before, there had been two. The downed tree was lying across the neighbor's lawn. Look at that, David said. It could have hit Mr. Wilbur's house, and we didn't even hear it fall. Wow, this is great, George said. They circled the tree. It looks like a sleeping giant. Look at those big limbs and branches. It's like a jungle. Let's play safari. We never had a jungle to play safari in before. David didn't wait for an answer. He was already climbing the fallen tree. David fearlessly led the expedition into the very heart of the jungle, stalking the mighty leopard. That afternoon, they rode the 7 seas with George at the helm, while David searched the horizon for pirate ships. All the next day and the day after that, they journeyed to the stars and beyond. Sometimes they just sat and enjoyed the view. The tree was a private place, big enough for secret dreams, small enough for shared adventure. What'll we do this afternoon? George asked. I don't care, David answered. It just feels good being here. Then it happened. They woke one morning to an ear-splitting roar and the sight of men advancing on the tree with chainsaws. How could they do this? David asked. It's our tree. It's our tree, but it's in Mr. Wilbur's yard. I guess that's how they could do it. But they didn't even tell us, David said, feeling as miserable as he had ever felt in his life. It was a great tree, said George. Yeah, David agreed. A great tree. David and George spent the rest of the day sitting under the surviving elm, watching the men haul away their tree. In the late afternoon, the sky grew dark, and thunder rumbled in the distance. Hey guys, Dad called. There's going to be a storm. The wind's kicking up. Come on inside before it starts to rain. David and George looked up at the old elm. This is a great tree too, David said. Yeah, George agreed. And if it fell, it would land in our yard. So, in that book, what I think is kind of neat is that something scary was sort of happening at first. Something that made the kids a little bit nervous. That hurricane. It was something different, something that, was a little scary, a little bit unsettling. But then it turned out that they could do different things that were fun too. They could get out the hurricane lamps, they could eat dinner around the fire, and then they got to play in that tree that fell, and they had all those different kinds of adventures. The Bible talks about times when different things may happen to us, things that make us a little bit nervous, but they can be opportunities to do something creative, to do something different. If you'd like, you could find a mom or a dad or a grandparent, and you could read the first part of Acts chapter 8, beginning about in verse 4 or so. It talks about how there were Christian believers in a city called Jerusalem, and they were very happy there, in their church there, but when other people started to chase them away, they were sad about that their church had to scatter because other people were being unkind to them. But when they scattered, they realized that was an opportunity to do something different, something creative. And so they preached about Jesus wherever they went. All the different places that they scattered to, they told others about God and about God's love. So you could read that story with a parent, a grandparent, or another adult, and then maybe talk some about what some of the things are that you've been able to do right now that are different and that have been creative and maybe have been fun. Staying at home as much as we have been doing, it has been different, and maybe at times it's felt a little weird or a little uncomfortable, but there are opportunities to be creative too. So maybe talk about something fun that you've done at home that you wouldn't have been able to do otherwise, or maybe talk about an opportunity that you've had to show God's love in a special way, in a creative way at home that you wouldn't have been able to do otherwise. Thanks for joining me for reading Hurricane. We'll be back next week with a new book. Bye.